everyone. Thank you for making it to the last session of the day. I intended for this cat to be like an angry, yelling cat, but someone said it looked like a yawning cat, and I thought, oh, that's so funny. It's the last talk of the day. Everyone's tired, so that's all of you yawning. So today we're going to talk about building developer tools your coworkers won't hate. And by your coworkers, I really mean me. What I like about Jay on the Beach is that it's a conference about so many different things like big data and DevOps and infrastructure, observability, monitoring, and the thing that all of these things have in common is that we're building for other engineers, and a lot of times we will end up not taking as much care or attention into the usability of our tools. And I wanted to point out some ways that we could make our tools better for everyone that we work with, and that person might be ourselves one day. So as Michael just said, I'm an observability engineer at Stripe. I've been designing observability and internal tools for most of my career. You can find my Twitter right there. If you want to follow along with the slides on your personal device, you can go to my Twitter, and I linked these slides in case you want to read. And there's my homepage. And I drew that cat too, so I'm pretty proud of my drawings. There will be a cat on every single slide. So stay away. All right, so we're going to talk about the motivation why you personally should care about designing usable engineering tools. We're going to talk about how you can do this by gathering feedback and doing user research in a more formal way. And then we're going to talk about 3 different sets of tools and specific things you can look out for in designing these kinds of tools. So let's get into it. Okay. So, why should you care? When you have bad UX for your internal tools, you will cause incidents. People will use the wrong flags, they'll do the wrong thing, and you will probably, I don't know, drop a table or delete like half of your cluster by accident because of Terraform or something like that. You will probably waste a lot of time. People will spend a lot of time debugging and just trying to figure out what the right usage of your tools is. And you will also create hostility in the sense that, okay, how many of you use Vim? Yeah? And how many of you have made that joke about how you can't escape Vim? If it's so hard to escape Vim, why do we keep using it? I love Vim, but I also don't think it's very usable. And so we can end up with this culture of hostility where we're looking down on people for being confused about using the tools instead of figuring out why it is that these tools are so hard to use. And so we should think a lot about how our tools are affecting the business, as in affecting the financial side, costing us more money than we need, costing us more time, and also just making it an unpleasant place to work. You know, I think I'm on the wrong slides because these are transitions, and so I'm going to quickly, that's great. It's the condensed slides, so I'm going to casually pretend like my Google Drive isn't being presented to all of you right now. That's great. See, I care a lot about the user experience of my slides, and so when I finish making the slides, I make a copy and then I condense it. And so now you will get transitions, as you can see. That's why I was hesitating earlier. It's 5 o'clock. All right, so how to do user research. So the first thing is, it's as simple as talking to people, but even though it sounds simple, it's not that simple. If you just talk to someone one-on-one, you don't do it in a formalized way, or you don't make sure you're asking the right kinds of questions, it's almost useless. And so the first thing you should think about is what format you want to start interviewing people in. And so first of all, you want to do one-on-ones. You want to find the people who are your customers for your tools, whether that's some sort of big data tool or some kind of internal script. And you want to hear why they're using your tool, what problems they're trying to solve, and where their pain points are. You can get a lot of really detailed information here. You can take a lot of notes on exactly what people want. A different way that you can do user interviews is focus groups. A focus group is one where everyone in the group is of the same background. And so, for example, you wouldn't make a focus group of, for example, product engineers and also infrastructure engineers, because they'd have pretty different needs from your tools. So for example, at Stripe, my company, not my company, the company I work at. We've done user interviews with the user operations team, so more of like a non-technical background, but they still need to use our tools to answer questions for customers. We've done interviews with infrastructure people. It turns out they mostly care about making sure our systems are healthy, but also our product engineers are looking for how to get insights into the business. And so these are totally different use cases. So you want to think about whether a one-on-one conversation or a focus group is the right fit for what you're trying to accomplish, and go from there. And when you're doing these interviews, you want to make sure you're not asking questions that confirm your own biases. And so, to give an example, if I was like, I really hate Jenkins. Do you hate Jenkins? I'm sure not very many people would say, yeah, I don't actually hate Jenkins. Jenkins is great. No, you'd either agree with me or you just feel really embarrassed and then not say anything, I imagine. And so you want to ask neutral questions. If you want to know how someone uses a tool, you don't say, so you're using this to help our customers, right? You might ask that in a more neutral way so that they can feel like they can answer the way that they really wanted to. You also want to make sure you dive as deeply as possible. I made this almost fatal mistake once of doing a lot of interviews, asking people what they thought of a vendor tool that I was evaluating. And I went around the whole company, asked a bunch of engineers, like, do you like this? Should we switch? And everyone said, yeah, it seems fine, do it. And I signed this like multi-million-dollar contract, and then I figured out that many of them had never ever logged on to the tool. And so it turned out when they said, yeah, it looks fine, they were pretty much just trying to get me to leave them alone, which is quite unfortunate because, I mean, at that point we'd already signed the contract, so there was nothing I could change about it. But if I had said, like, if I had asked, like, did you use the tool? What do you specifically like about it? What features do you absolutely need to do your job? Maybe I would have gotten some more detailed answers. So if someone says things are fine, that's probably not true. They're probably just trying to prioritize something that you are not aware of. For example, right now, today or tomorrow is the deadline for GDPR. If you did an user interview this week, most of your coworkers would probably not have an answer for you because they're prioritizing something very significant. So be aware of those kinds of priorities as well. And the difference here is that when you're doing user interviews, it's not like a standard user research interview where you're talking to an external customer. You're talking to your own coworkers who you will be talking to every single day for the rest of your time at that company. And so if you waste their time with too many interviews and then you don't act on the feedback that they give you, they'll stop trusting you and they'll stop giving you more feedback. And I think that's fair. If you don't act on their feedback, then what is the point of you talking to them? So make sure you're building trust by acting on the information that they give you. And also, the other benefit is that you will make sure you're actually doing the right thing. So in summary, for research, make sure you're talking to people in your company. It doesn't have to be extremely rigid. You can just ask someone to give you half an hour. Make sure you're asking the right questions and diving really deep. Make sure you're even using the right question template. Like maybe if you do an interview with more than 10 people, you might want to actually write down a list of questions that you ask every single person. And you also want to make sure that you're going to talk to these people over time and build that relationship so that you can keep getting feedback from them. And now we can dive into command line tools, which this cat is pretty great. The cats are more for me than for the audience to enjoy. So when you're building a command line tool, the most important thing I'd say is don't make breaking changes, or don't make it so easy for people to make breaking changes without realizing what they're going to do. So example here is like if you run Terraform, you can say Terraform plan, and that will just give you a preview of what you're about to do, and then you have to actually type Terraform apply. It'll give you the preview again. You have to type out yes in order for it to actually apply your changes. So in this case, say -- confirm. Maybe if you run script without the -- confirm flag, it'll give you an error, or it will ask you to make sure you really, really want to do what you want it to do. That will save you from a lot of incidents. And here's a Terraform diff. I realize it's not that visible from your perspective, but it'll show you what's added, what's changed, and what's deleted. And you also want to make sure that your command line tools are consistent. So for example, here's the help page for man. -H actually stands for help in this case, which seems pretty obvious. But when you would think that H always means help. for less, H does not mean help. I actually don't know what H stands for, but if you're learning about all these tools and you think that -H will always give you help, that's not true. And that's a terrible user experience because that's more things you have to remember. What's great about this is that you could type man less, and it's accurate for me. It's accurate for, it'll actually give you the answer for less. You also want to make sure you want to make sure your tools match your other tools, or your arguments match your other tools. And you also want to make sure it matches historical usage. And so in general, as an industry, we've realized that like -B might mean verbose or version. -H usually means help. And so you don't want to overload it with more custom flags. So when in doubt, probably use the whole word as a flag. You also don't want to break existing tools. So this means, again, the standard Unix built-in tools, but also other tools at your company. A funny story I heard from one of my colleagues is that someone decided at their company to add emoji to their build tools. And so when you try to take the output from that, it had all these emoji in it, you pipe it into somewhere else, it crashes because not all build tools accept Unicode. And so you want to make sure your tools, by adding all these new features, you're not breaking other tools. And so one way you could do that is have integration testing, make sure all of your workflows are covered. And you also want to, of course, think about what the context of your company and what other tools are out there. So, of course, you can think about what happens if you pipe your output into another tool. If you do a lot of like pre-ASCII art or anything like that, it's not going to render well. You should make sure your tools are easy to pipe and do like grep and sort and all those great kinds of built-ins there. And what's wild about all of this Unix stuff is that I kept thinking, isn't this all stuff that we've talked about for like literally decades? And the answer is yes. There are many books, many books about the Unix philosophy, many old famous dudes who have said the same things that I'm saying. And so, if you look at things like the rule of composition, the rule of modularity, rule of least surprise, all of these things have been covered quite in great detail. And yet, I think as we get more advanced, as we start doing more complicated things, we forget these fundamentals that have been around for such a long time. So, in summary, make sure when you're doing a command line tool, make sure you're providing previews and diffs. You're allowing people to confirm their changes, their breaking changes if you're going to be managing infrastructure. You want to be consistent, and you also want to integrate with the rest of your tools. I'm looking at the art of Unix programming. I actually think the Wikipedia article is pretty thorough, and so you can find all of the rules of building great command line tools on the Wikipedia article. Next, we're going to talk about data analysis tools. That's also my favorite cat. All of these cats are great. So when you're doing something that's related to data analysis, maybe that's a metrics visualization tool, or maybe it's a logging tool, Jupyter notebooks, anything like that, you need to provide a REPL. If you have like some API endpoint for getting data, and I have to curl just to like try something out and get a JSON back, I'm not going to do it because I don't remember how to use curl. If there's no way for me to quickly get a small amount of data out, just check the format just to test it out, it's going to be extremely difficult for me to develop with your data tool. You also want to just make sure you add autocomplete. If you don't do anything else, just make sure autocomplete is there. The reason for this is that people often don't know what all of the different kinds of options there are. They might think that they know one specific tool or one specific metric name, for example, and then they might be looking for something like everything related to system memory. And if they just type in memory and that's all they get, they're going to get stuck. And so autocomplete can help them figure out what their actual options are. And of course, the GUI is ideal. Some kind of way of maybe a web application for seeing what exactly they can do. Not everyone remembers all of the different usage patterns for a command line tool. And it's 2018, we can build a web app. As for correctness, make sure you're offering syntax errors and highlighting. I think this one's somewhat more straightforward. You do want to make sure people, when they get error messages, they get useful error messages. And so, last, explorability. if you're building a web application, I do have to say that React is really popular, and I love developing with React. I love single page applications. It makes sense for all those like performance reasons. But there's so many ways that you can break a single page application, including, say, you've been spending like an hour on your web application, you're finding all this data, you've been building up a gigantic chart, and you like hit the back button because you wanted to go see a metric that you just saw, and now you're back on your home page. That's the most painful thing, when you've just lost all your data because you chose the back button when it apparently was not implemented correctly. You also want to make sure that when you refresh the page that you don't throw away everything that the users put in. These are all things that I've been suffering from lately. You also want the URL to be somewhat RESTful, so if I copy that URL and send it to someone else, they should see exactly what I'm looking at. They should not just see your home page, for example. And you also want people to be able to open in a new tab. If you like right-click or command-click or control-click, and that leads to a new page, say if that leads to an action instead of just like the context menu, or if you don't allow them to open in a new tab, that's pretty broken. You want to let people use more than one tab of your website. So with data analysis tools, make sure overall the themes are that you want people to be able to do things quickly, you want them to be able to discover things, you want them to do it correctly, and you want them to be able to explore without spending too much time just struggling to make your tool work. Last up, build tools. I don't know who wrote the build because I don't know how to find the build. This is mostly about me and Jenkins, to be honest. But it's also just about tools in general. Pretty much any sort of web-based tool. You might have like 50 different things that a user could do on your website. For example, they might want to configure their builds. They might want to rebuild. They might want to just find the logs for the latest build. There's so many things, but like 90% of the time they're doing that one action. For me, maybe it's rebuilding. I just want to see if rebuilding will get that flaky test pass, which is, I realize, an anti-pattern in itself, but that is reality. So if you do your user interviews and you figure out what kinds of things people frequently want to do, you want to make it as easy as possible to find those options. So there's a way to prioritize that in your design. Oh, I added autocomplete again because it was really important. So seriously, do it. Failing fast. This is, again, I'd say more of like an anti-pattern in your configuration, but say you're developing and you let people push code to your CI or whatever you use, maybe it's Travis, maybe it's Jenkins, and they wait like 10 minutes and then they realize that they just forgot to lint, or they forgot to use Go format, or they forgot to run the unit test locally, and they fail, and it took them like, again, 10 minutes, 30 minutes to figure that out. If you just slide in a warning there and say, did you make sure that you did all these things locally, within a few seconds, then that would save people a lot of time. So always make sure you're failing fast. You don't have to run through the entire suite of tests if it's already failing from the start. And you should also remind people, again, to lint and do the unit testing. In terms of bad input, let's say people frequently mistype a flag, or they forget a flag, or let's say, example from work would be if I forget to specify like which set I want for the cluster that I'm acting on. You can just say a bad input, but what's even more helpful is if you say like, did you mean, or here's all the options that you could have selected, and that will at least help people figure out which path they should be going on. So you should try to predict what kinds of mistakes people will make and then help them get out of there as quickly as possible. And this is not useful output. If you're in a command line tool or a build tool or anything like that, and someone makes a mistake, and all you get back is a gigantic stack trace, that's not okay. You do want to make sure that people will, if they say forget a flag that you actually wanted to require them to include, you should detect that and then tell them, please include this flag, rather than assuming the flag is there and then crashing on the stack trace. Shout out to like every open source tool that doesn't use like an argument parser. One example of really useful output that I found is the Rust compiler. In case you can't see this, it says not the less than sign is not interpreted as a comparison in this case. And so it's kind of expecting that people are going to make mistakes here. They're going to not notice which, or they're not going to realize that the less than sign does not mean literally less than. And so I find this really helpful. I think the Rust compiler is a really great example of like a really usable tool. So that's what I wanted to include. So in summary of how to build a developer tool that your coworkers will not hate you for, first of all, make sure you talk to them and figure out what it is that they don't like, and build for that. It's really, really tempting to build tools that satisfy your own use case, or you just want to get it out there and move on to the next cool project. But we should take some small amount of pride in our tools and build them so that people find them easier to use. You want to imagine how people will use your tools. Put yourself in their shoes. They're not from the same team as you, for example. So make sure you're building for all kinds of use cases for your coworkers. And user experience and good design matters even for infrastructure tools. I think we have a tendency to make things a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, just because we're engineers, we'll figure it out. But that's just a waste of time. I think most of the things that I listed in this talk are actually things that would take less than a day to implement for the most part. And with just a few hours or a few days of work, we can make things so much better for our entire company. So thank you. Thanks for coming today.